Ever gone down like one of those internet rabbit holes, you know, researching the latest health trends, trying to figure out what's actually legit?
Oh, yeah.
Well, today's deep dive is about one of those rabbit holes, um, specifically the world of experimental treatments and honestly, like the Wild West of clinics promising these miracle cures.
Right.
And this case, let me tell you, this case had me hooked from the first headline.
It's really interesting, when you think about it, how much of this whole area just connects back to this, like, deep human desire for hope.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially when you're talking about people facing a health challenge where traditional medicine, maybe hasn't worked for them or doesn't have all the answers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's where things can get, well, tricky. We're talking about a recent Ninth Circuit Court decision, and it's like sent shockwaves through this whole field of cell therapy.
Yeah, it's a big one.
So basically, you've got a California stem cell treatment center that got taken to court by the FDA, and this ruling, it has huge implications for the future of these cutting-edge treatments.
It really highlights that, that tension that exists between, on the one hand, people wanting the absolute latest and greatest medical advancements as quickly as possible, and on the other hand, making sure that those advancements are actually safe and that they actually work.
Right, exactly.
And that's where, regulation comes in.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
So let's break down this case a little bit. This clinic, they were offering something called, are you ready for this? Stromal vascular fraction treatment.
Catchy.
Rolls right off the tongue.
Yeah.
Sounds complicated, right?
It can be, but think of it this way maybe. Imagine you've got like a big scoop of Rocky Road ice cream.
Okay.
Okay, so that's your fat tissue, right?
Okay.
Now, picture this. You're carefully picking out all the marshmallows.
Okay.
Those marshmallows, those are your stromal vascular fraction cells. SVF for short.
Got it.
So this clinic, what they did was they took those cells, those marshmallows, from a patient's fat, concentrated them, and then injected them back into the patient. And they were saying this could treat, well, a whole range of conditions.
Okay, that makes it a little easier to visualize. But, and here's the catch, right? This whole process, picking out those cellular marshmallows, it wasn't FDA approved.
Right.
And that's where the legal battle gets interesting.
Yeah.
Because the court had to decide if this SVF concoction, if this was actually a drug. Because if it is, then the FDA, they need to be involved to make sure that it's safe and it actually works.
And this case really came down to how the law defines a drug, especially when you're talking about something that's made from a patient's own cells.
So what's the verdict? Is it a drug?
The court said yes, and I think that surprised a lot of people.
Really?
Yeah, because you might think, well, if it's just your own cells, what's the big deal? But the court argued that by isolating and concentrating those specific cells, the clinic had actually created something new. It was a biological product, and it needed to be regulated just like any other drug. So it's kind of like the difference between, like, baking a cake at home with your own eggs and flour versus, like, selling some new untested ingredient that you just made up in your kitchen, and you're claiming that it makes the cake taste better, last longer. The FDA wants to make sure that new ingredient isn't going to make people sick.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, exactly.
All right.
It's about consumer safety.
Yes.
And, this case, this wasn't just some like minor legal technicality. This decision could change the entire landscape of how these cell therapies are regulated moving forward, which is why, everyone in the field is paying very close attention to this.
Yeah, for sure. So we've established this case as a big deal, but what does it actually mean for the future of cell therapy? And more importantly, what does it mean for you? Well, we're going to unpack all of that right after the break, so stick around. So before the break, we were talking about this case with the FDA taking on that stem cell clinic.
Yeah, and this wasn't just like an open and shut case, for the FDA.
Right.
The clinic actually had some pretty interesting arguments. They were really trying to find a way around all these legal issues around cell therapy and how it's regulated.
Yeah, they tried to use that same surgical procedure exception. What was that all about?
Okay, so imagine you're getting a bone graft, right?
Yeah.
The surgeon takes bone from your hip, puts it in your arm. The FDA, they don't require separate approvals for taking out the bone and then putting it back in.
Oh, interesting.
It's considered the same procedure because they're just using your own tissue.
Okay.
So the clinic's argument was that their SVF treatment, with those marshmallow cells, it was basically the same thing, just moving cells around within the same patient.
So they're saying, hey, we're just rearranging the furniture here. We're not building a whole new house.
Exactly. But the court didn't buy it. They said that processing the fat, extracting those specific cells, concentrating them, that created something new. It wasn't just rearranging. It was more like, you know, taking that furniture, chopping it up, turning it into like a completely different piece of furniture.
So this ruling, it sets a precedent, right?
Right.
It's not just about one clinic in California anymore.
Exactly. This case, it's like shining a spotlight on this whole field of cell therapy, and the message is pretty clear. The FDA is watching.
Which makes sense because there's a lot at stake. We're talking about people's health here.
Absolutely.
And people are often drawn to these kinds of treatments when they feel like they've run out of options, right?
Yeah.
Which, sadly, that makes them even more vulnerable.
It does, and that's where I think things get, ethically murky, because while there are a lot of researchers and clinics out there who are doing like incredible legitimate work with cell therapy,
Oh, for sure.
there are also, unfortunately, there are also those who are just looking to capitalize, on hope and desperation.
Yeah, taking advantage of people when they're at their most vulnerable, that's never right.
Hmm.
So what can patients do, I guess, to protect themselves? How do they tell the difference between a legit clinic and one that's like, just trying to make a quick buck?
That's such an important question, and this is where organizations like the ISCT, the International Society for Cell and Gene Therapy, come in. They're basically like, the watchdogs of the industry, making sure that people are following ethical practices, that the science is rigorous. They actually have resources on their website to help patients find clinics that, meet their standards.
So it's like Consumer Reports, but for cutting-edge medical treatments.
Exactly, exactly.
It sounds like they played a key role in this case too, right?
They did, yeah. The ISCT actually filed what's called a friend of the court brief in support of the FDA. And basically what they were saying was, look, we are all for pushing the boundaries of medicine. We want to see innovation, but what this clinic is doing is dangerous. It could undermine this entire field.
Yeah. Having experts like that, weigh in, that definitely sends a strong message.
Yeah.
So we've got this landmark ruling. We've got a crackdown on unregulated clinics. We've got organizations like ISCT fighting the good fight. I mean, where does this leave the future of cell therapy?
Right.
Is this ruling going to stifle innovation?
Right.
Or is it going to ultimately make these treatments safer and more accessible for everyone?
That's the question.
It's like every good courtroom drama needs that, that dramatic closing argument.
Right.
And it feels like we've reached that point in our deep dive here.
Yeah, we're getting there.
Into this wild world of cell therapy and trying to figure out, like, how do we regulate this?
Absolutely.
And just like a good legal thriller, I feel like the ending of this case, it leaves us with more questions than answers. It's like a little bit of a cliffhanger.
Totally. Yeah, because this ruling, it could have some really, really big ripple effects.
Right, because on the one hand, it feels like a win, at least initially, for patient safety. The FDA, they're drawing a line in the sand. They're saying, look, we're not going to let just anyone offer these risky treatments that haven't been proven to work.
Right. And I think we're likely to see stricter regulations, across the board because of this case.
Yeah, like what? Give me an example.
So think like clearer standards for how clinical trials have to be run, tougher rules around how these cell therapies are actually made and manufactured. I wouldn't be surprised if we see, like, maybe even a national registry to track all these different treatments and, like, what the outcomes are.
Which, yeah, it makes sense, but it also makes me think about all those medical breakthroughs that we've seen, throughout history.
Right.
A lot of those, they probably wouldn't have happened if there had been tons and tons of red tape.
Right.
So how do you find that balance, right, between protecting patients, obviously, but then also allowing for the kind of innovation that leads to those, like, aha moments in medicine?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, right?
It really is.
And it's where, I think that organization we mentioned earlier, the ISCT, the International Society for Cell and Gene Therapy, they have a really, really important role to play because they're not just going around like, saying no to absolutely everything. They're pushing for ethical research, for research that's done rigorously. They want to see scientists and doctors collaborating more. They're trying to create the kind of environment where those legitimate breakthroughs, where those can actually happen.
So it's not about, like, just shutting down all the bad actors. It's about, like, how do we actually empower the good guys?
Yes, exactly. And And this is where you, the listener, come in,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Because, knowledge is power, as they say.
Yeah.
If you are considering any kind of experimental treatment, do your research, especially in a field like cell therapy. I mean, it's so
Yeah.
new, it's complicated. You really got to do your due diligence.
Don't just, like, take someone's word for it, right? No
Exactly.
matter how fancy their clinic might look or how many letters they have after their name.
Right. You got to check their credentials. Are there any red flags that pop up? Make sure you understand the risks as well as the potential benefits.
Yes. Yes. And I think sometimes, too, we forget, like, it's okay to ask questions.
Yes.
If something doesn't feel right, if you're not getting clear answers, trust your gut.
100%.
Like this case, it's a reminder that we all have a role to play in, like demanding safe, ethical, and of course, effective treatments.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, this whole conversation, it's really made me think about how we navigate all this health information that's out there, right? Because it's really easy to get caught up in the hype, but this case is such a good reminder to okay, be informed, be critical, and most importantly, be your own advocate.
Do your own advocate. Yeah, that's a great way to end this, because at the end of the day, it's your health, it's your body, it's your choice.
Beautifully said.